I need you to calm down, sir. This is a flight, not your personal office.
Ma'am, I am on an important call.
You need to turn off your phone now. This is the final warning.
I'm on an important call. Can't it wait?
Have you ever wondered what you would do if someone looked you in the eye and told you that you didn't belong when you knew, without a doubt, that you did? On a quiet evening flight, Marcus Hale, a black CEO, took his rightful seat in first class. He had the ticket, the confirmation, the proof, but within minutes, that seat was stripped away and handed to another passenger simply because he was deemed less worthy. In that moment, Marcus faced a choice: stay silent, as so many have been forced to do, or stand against a system that hoped he would shrink into invisibility. What would you have done if you were in his place? Would you trade dignity for comfort or risk everything for justice? This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a story about power, truth, and the quiet courage it takes to say, no more. Stay with us as we step inside a journey that froze a $120 million deal, shook an airline to its core, and forced the world to confront a painful truth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of the story. The boarding announcement had barely finished echoing through the cabin when a voice sliced through the polished air of first class. "Sir, you'll need to vacate this seat immediately." Marcus Hale lifted his eyes from the small, leather-bound notebook resting on his lap. The warm light of the cabin glinted off the silver rims of his glasses. His expression was calm, but a pressure began to tighten in his chest. All around him, curious faces turned. Some passengers stared openly, brows raised, as though waiting for a scene. Others glanced quickly, then looked away, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or champagne glasses. A few smirked, as if in silent amusement. Marcus sat firmly in seat 2A, the spot he had booked 3 weeks earlier. He drew a long, steady breath. The gesture of calm was familiar. He had practiced it for years, yet beneath the surface, a storm of memory stirred. The woman standing in front of him was tall, immaculate, and rehearsed in her composure. Her navy uniform was crisp, her red scarf perfectly tied, her posture elegant, but her eyes cold, sharp, unblinking, held no warmth. Isabella Cruz, the purser of the flight, spoke again, her voice coated with the brittle politeness of someone used to being obeyed. "Sir, this seat has been reassigned for a very important passenger. We will, of course, compensate you with a travel voucher. Please collect your belongings." The words floated into the air like broken glass. Marcus did not move. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze dropping for a moment to the phone in his hand. The screen glowed with a notification. Wire transfer, complete $25 million. It was the first installment of a $120 million lifeline his firm, Phoenix Capital, had pledged to SkyGlobe Airlines. The company had been drowning in debt. Marcus was their salvation. With a single tap, his thumb hovered over the option to reverse the payment. His lips curved almost imperceptibly. A faint smile, not of amusement, but of certainty. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "This seat," Marcus said evenly, his voice resonant yet quiet, "was purchased by me, fully confirmed. I am not moving." The hum of the cabin dimmed. A sudden silence stretched, punctuated only by the muffled clink of a champagne glass across the aisle. A businessman, broad-shouldered and pale, cleared his throat, then leaned back in his seat as though the situation were routine. His eyes flicked toward Marcus with the smug detachment of someone certain of the ending. Isabella's smile did not falter, but it grew sharper. She bent slightly, lowering her voice, yet ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "Sir, we have a VIP who requires this seat. You will need to cooperate. It will be easier for everyone." Marcus set his boarding pass neatly on the tray table in front of him. His tone did not rise, but the words cut like steel. "This is mine. Booked weeks ago. Paid in full. I will not leave." The tension in the air thickened. Whispers rippled through the rows. A man in the second row whispered to his wife. A woman across the aisle fidgeted, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Marcus sat still, the tailored charcoal of his suit uncreased, his deep purple tie undisturbed, his leather case at his side. Yet inside, memories pressed against him, old wounds, reopened by this moment. At 17, a guidance counselor had told him, "College isn't for you. A trade job would be safer." At 25, his first business plan had been dismissed by a banker with the words, "You don't quite fit the image we're looking for." At 30, as one of the few black men at Harvard Business School, he had overheard, "He's probably here because of affirmative action." Every time he was reduced, every time he was pushed aside, Marcus had answered not with anger, but with relentless achievement. Results had been his weapon, perseverance his armor. And now, here, on the very plane of the airline he was poised to rescue, he was being treated not as an investor, not as a paying customer, but as an intruder. His heartbeat thudded not from fear, but from fury, from the bitter recognition of a pattern he knew too well. Marcus folded his hands over the leather case on his lap. His chin lifted slightly, his gaze steady on Isabella. "This seat," he repeated, low and unwavering, "is mine, and I am not going anywhere." For a heartbeat, the cabin froze. Then, as though rehearsed, two uniformed security officers stepped into the aisle. Their hands hovered too close to their holsters, their eyes scanning Marcus like a problem to be solved. The atmosphere turned electric. A few passengers lowered their eyes, retreating into false invisibility. Others leaned slightly, phones angled discreetly, recording. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the engines powering up outside. Inside, Marcus felt the old fury boiling, but beneath it burned something sharper, a determination forged from every humiliation he had ever endured. This moment, he knew, was not merely about him. It was about every black traveler who had been told, in 1,000 ways, "You don't belong here." If they wanted to drag him from seat 2A, the world would see. And the world, Marcus thought, would finally know. He leaned back slightly, exhaled once, and let his gaze drift to the window. The sky outside was a pale canvas, waiting. The cabin remained wrapped in uneasy silence, but within Marcus Hale, a storm was gathering. The hum of the engines filled the silence left behind by Isabella's demand. Marcus remained still, his eyes fixed on the tray table where his boarding pass rested like a piece of evidence. The pass was crisp, inked with his name, flight number, and the seat, 2A. Yet, in this moment, it carried little weight. Behind his composed exterior, Marcus's thoughts began to drift backward, uninvited, into the corridors of memory. It was always like this. Every confrontation stirred echoes of the past, reminders that the sting of being unseen and unwanted had never truly left him. He was 8 years old again, standing in line at a grocery store in South Chicago. His mother, Gloria Hale, balanced 3 bags of bread, eggs, and milk. The cashier barely glanced at her, sighing impatiently, muttering, "Welfare folks always in the way." Marcus had heard it, the sneer lodged in the woman's voice, and he had seen his mother's eyes lower as though absorbing a blow she couldn't return. He clenched his fists under the table now, remembering. At 14, Marcus had been accepted into a magnet school, one of only a handful of black students. On his first day, a teacher mistook him for a janitor's son delivering papers. When he corrected her, she smiled awkwardly, saying, "Well, good for you, honey. You must be special." And then came Harvard. The memory was sharper, colder. Standing outside the library, a campus police officer had stopped him, asking for ID 3 times in the same week. Each time, Marcus complied, voice steady, hands visible, even though shame burned in his chest. Now, decades later, seated in first class with a valid ticket, the same fire crackled inside him. Every moment of humiliation had prepared him for this. Isabella Cruz stood stiffly, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze sweeping over Marcus like he was furniture out of place. She leaned toward one of the officers, whispering something sharp, her voice just low enough not to be caught by nearby phones recording. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his eyes catching the faint reflection of himself in the polished window. He looked calm, collected exactly as he had trained himself to appear. But deep inside, the storm howled louder. If I get up now, he thought, they win again. They write the story, the loud black man who made a scene. But if I stay, maybe the story changes. The weight of responsibility pressed against him. He was no longer just Marcus Hale, businessman. He was every kid who had been told no, every parent who had worked 3 jobs only to be dismissed, every professional who had been asked if they were in the right place. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing his mother's voice. Baby, when they push you aside, don't let them erase you. Stand tall. Make them see you. The officer on the left shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing the radio on his shoulder. He was younger, maybe late 20s, his posture betraying unease. The other officer, older and sterner, stood like a wall, unmoving. Passengers whispered again. One woman, 2 rows back, pulled her phone higher, recording with deliberate intent. A man across the aisle cleared his throat, muttering under his breath. Just move already. You're holding everyone up. Marcus turned his head slowly, meeting the man's eyes. The businessman faltered under the calm intensity of his gaze. For a moment, he looked away. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. His heart was pounding, but his voice, when it came, was quiet, even tender in its control. Officer, he said, looking directly at the younger man, before you act, I want you to look at this. He slid the boarding pass across the tray table, pushing it forward with 2 fingers. The young officer hesitated, glancing down, then back up at Marcus. This is my seat, Marcus continued. Paid for, confirmed. I am not refusing to comply with safety. I am only refusing to surrender my dignity. The words hung in the cabin, weighty, undeniable. The younger officer's jaw tightened. He glanced briefly at his partner, then at Isabella, whose lips pressed into a thin, angry line. She did not like hesitation. For Marcus, the silence gave him space to think, to breathe. He leaned back, his hands folded once more over his leather case. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, his mind was alive with questions, each sharper than the last. How many times must I prove myself? How many times will they demand I shrink? He imagined headlines scrolling across a phone screen. He imagined passengers replaying the footage they were capturing now. He imagined his mother, somewhere beyond this world, watching. The storm inside him steadied into something else, resolve. He would not let this pass. As the tension pressed down, Marcus's thoughts sharpened into a chilling clarity. This was not just about a seat. This was about a pattern that had followed him since childhood, a pattern millions of others knew too well. If they dragged him out, it would be recorded. If they silenced him, the silence itself would echo. Marcus leaned slightly forward, his voice now softer, but carrying an edge of steel. You'll have to decide, he told the officers. Do you want the world to see you take a man out of his rightful seat, or do you want the world to see you do the right thing? The younger officer swallowed hard. Isabella's eyes flicked with anger. The businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. And Marcus Hale, still seated in 2A, felt the weight of every injustice behind him crystallize into one defining choice. The aisle brightened with the swing of the forward galley door. A man in a slate pinstripe suit stepped in with the casual arrogance of someone who expected rooms to part for him. His cufflinks flashed like small knives under the cabin lights. He glanced once at the bulkhead, once at Isabella, and then locked his eyes on 2A. "That seat is mine," he announced, as if the statement itself were a key that opened any door. Isabella straightened. "Mr. Vaughn, we're addressing it now. Richard Vaughn." Marcus knew the name. Real estate magnate. Donor at charity galas, often photographed in tuxedos with a glass of something aged and expensive. The kind of man who believed first class was not a service, but a birthright. Richard's gaze slid over Marcus, cool and measuring. "We can handle this quickly, can't we?" he said to Isabella, not to Marcus, as if Marcus were a misplaced bag. Marcus spoke calmly. "It won't be quick, and it won't be right." A tremor of whispers rolled through the rows. The older security officer's grip tightened on his belt. The younger one shifted his stance, torn between protocol and the discomfort that had flickered in his eyes moments earlier. Isabella's smile thinned. "Sir, for the final time, you need to move to a seat in economy. We'll compensate you with a travel voucher." Richard leaned closer, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. Some people were born for first class, and some weren't. No shame in that. The sentence landed like a slap. Marcus felt the old heat rise, but he kept his breathing steady, his posture composed. The line between fury and clarity can be a wire. He had learned to walk it. He turned to the younger officer. "You see my boarding pass? You know this is my seat. Are you prepared to remove me from it?" The younger man looked down, then at Isabella. A beat of hesitation. Then the older officer stepped forward, voice flat. "Sir, please gather your belongings." Phones tilted higher. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "I'm recording this." A man in 1C muttered, "Ridiculous," though whether at Marcus or the scene itself, it was impossible to tell. Marcus unclasped his seatbelt with deliberate care. He picked up his leather case, smoothed a non-existent crease from his jacket, and stood. The cabin seemed to lean toward him, hungry for a resolution. He met Isabella's stare, then Richard's. Richard smiled, triumphant, and slid into 2A without a glance at the boarding pass that still rested on the tray. Marcus let the silence stretch a heartbeat longer, then spoke in a voice just above a whisper, yet it seemed to carry to the last row of first class. "This seat was mine. Remember that." He turned into the aisle. The officers flanked him, not touching, but close enough that their presence felt like hands. The walk felt longer than the length of the plane. Past wide seats and stemmed glasses, past pressed linen napkins and folded newspapers, through the soft cocoon designed to make the privileged forget that the world outside had edges. Eyes slid away, screens lit up with sudden fascination. He heard a chuckle. He heard a sigh. Near the divider curtain, a flight attendant, he didn't know young, dark hair neatly pinned, looked at him with something like apology. Their eyes met for a second. She said nothing, neither did he. Then the curtain brushed his shoulder, and the world changed. Economy felt narrower by inches that mattered. The air seemed warmer, crowded with elbows and backpacks. A middle seat awaited him. Row 31, the aisle passenger already bracing his knees against the seat in front. The window passenger pressing herself tighter to the wall as Marcus approached. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly. The aisle man grunted and shifted his thigh half an inch. Marcus breathed in, turned his shoulder, and slid into the space. His knees met the hard plastic of the seat ahead. The armrest quivered under his forearm. He set his leather case under the seat and stared at his hands for a moment. They were steady. The hum of the plane returned, but it sounded different here. A few seconds later, a plastic cup landed on his tray table with a slosh of water. "You asked for this," a passing attendant said without looking at him. The cup was half full, the rim wet. Marcus nodded once, dabbed at the spill with a napkin, and took a measured sip. "Rough ride up there?" the aisleman asked, not unkindly, but with the blunt curiosity of someone who liked answers more than nuance. "Something like that," Marcus replied. "People like us don't get a fair shake in any cabin," the man said, and Marcus heard the weight behind the pronoun, the way it tried to pull him into a fraternity of shared inconvenience. He let the words pass without catching them. His phone buzzed. A notification crawled across the screen. Baggage rerouted Minneapolis. Marcus stared at the message, the chill of it settling over him. Inside that suitcase were documents, printed redundancies of slides and contracts, clothing arranged for meetings, small rituals of preparation that mattered. Rerouted could be a mistake. It could also be a message. He opened the voice recorder and spoke under the engine noise. 1532. Baggage rerouted to MSP without request. Suspected interference. He saved the note, then opened another app and began typing. Ticket checks unevenly enforced. Water served half full. Tone of staff dismissive. Security proximity escalated immediately. No confirmation check of alternate passenger. Across the aisle, a young woman angled her phone. The red light reflected in her eyes. "I saw what they did," she whispered. "If you need the video, I can send it." "Thank you," Marcus said, and he meant it. "Please do." The video arrived seconds later. He forwarded it to a secure address, then to another redundant protections engraved by experience. He looked at the clip, sound low. The frame caught Isabella's posture, the officer's approach, Richard's smile as he claimed the seat. It was all there, clean and damning. He felt anger again, hot, immediate. Then it drained into resolve. Evidence was oxygen. It kept truth alive long enough to be heard. The plane rolled back from the gate. A chime sounded. As the safety demonstration began, Marcus's phone trembled again. "Your transfer has been posted." The earlier notification repeated in a banner as though to taunt him. $25 million. The first piece of the lifeline. He could still reverse it midair, could trigger a cascade of calls and quiet alarms in glass towers across Manhattan. He glanced toward the curtain. Somewhere beyond, Richard Vaughn reclined with champagne. Somewhere beyond. Isabella resumed the choreography of service as though nothing had happened. Somewhere beyond. A circle of passengers pretended not to remember. The cabin dimmed. The plane lifted. Marcus closed his eyes and saw his mother again, walking him to school under a winter sky that smelled like metal, telling him not to let the world erase him. He saw himself at 19, sliding a resume across a desk. He saw himself at 33, signing the founding documents for Phoenix Capital, hands shaking not with fear, but with the weight of choosing to build something no one had offered him. The seat dug into his knees. The plastic cup knocked lightly against the tray as the plane climbed. He folded his hands, felt the familiar roughness of his knuckles, and exhaled slowly. A new notification. The young woman in 31C had gone live. Her voice was steady, indignant. "I just watched a black CEO get pushed out of his first-class seat for a rich white guy. We all saw his boarding pass. The staff didn't care. Security closed in like he was a threat. I'm streaming this because pretending not to see is part of the problem." Comments began to stack in, bubbles of words rolling too fast to read. Outrage, disbelief, 1,000 different ways to say enough. Marcus took one last look at the curtain. Then he opened a blank note and titled it simply, "After Landing." He wrote the first line, "Reverse the 25." Then the next call council, "Move meeting location," "Request board session." Then another "Ask Layla Morgan." He paused over the name. He hadn't met her yet. But the face of the young attendant near the divider had stayed with him, the brief, unguarded apology in her eyes. He had practiced reading rooms his entire life. Something in her expression suggested that not everyone on this flight had chosen complicity. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The aisleman shifted, giving Marcus an extra inch without comment. It felt like a small mercy, and it landed that way. Richard Vaughn laughed from beyond the curtain, the sound muffled but unmistakable. Marcus looked down at the plastic cup, at the waterline steady and low, and allowed himself one thin smile, cool, controlled, promising. They had taken a seat. They had given him a case. The climb eased. The cabin settled into its rituals, and Marcus Hale, compressed into row 31, began to plan the shape of the storm he would bring. When the plane touched down at LAX, the wheels shuddered against the runway, but Marcus barely noticed. His phone had been vibrating nonstop since the final 30 minutes of the flight. Each buzz was another notification, another stranger amplifying the video that had begun with Isabella's command and ended with Richard Vaughn settling into 2A like a king on borrowed land. As the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers sprang up, dragging bags from overhead bins, filling the aisle with the restless shuffle of people who wanted to be anywhere but here. Marcus stayed seated, hands folded, phone pressed between his palms. He refreshed his feed again. The video had already been shared 50,000 times. The hashtag #Justice for Marcus was climbing. Comments poured in disbelief, anger, support, memes. A wave was building, and it had his name on it. The aisle cleared slowly. Marcus stood last, retrieving his leather case with quiet precision. He stepped into the aisle, nodded to the young woman from row 31C who had streamed her video live, and offered a simple "Thank you." She gave him a small, nervous smile, as if realizing for the first time who he truly was. The curtain separating first class had been drawn back. Richard Vaughn was already gone, whisked away by ground staff. Isabella stood near the galley, face neutral, though her eyes flicked to Marcus with a mix of irritation and unease. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it. He walked past her without pause, the leather soles of his shoes clicking steadily against the jet bridge. The California air met him like a slap, warm, dry, alive. Marcus breathed it in, let it settle, then pulled his phone again. A message blinked from his assistant. Board meeting request acknowledged. Crisis protocols in motion. Another buzz his counsel. Need you at hotel in 30. Have statements, video copies, chain of custody prepped, and then a journalist contact. We're running this tonight. Care to comment? He typed quickly, statement coming soon. Wait for it. In the back of a waiting car. Marcus leaned against the leather seat. The driver adjusted the radio, and suddenly his own name was spilling from the speakers. Passenger identified as Marcus Hale, CEO of Phoenix Capital, forcibly reassigned from his confirmed first-class seat. The video, now viral, has prompted widespread outrage. The clip played again, the faint sound of Isabella's voice filling the car. Sir, this seat has been reassigned. Then the murmurs, the movement, the silence. And finally, Richard Vaughn's satisfied smirk as he settled into 2A. Marcus closed his eyes. The sound of it was worse than the memory. The driver lowered the volume, glanced into the rearview mirror. Mr. Hale. Yes, I saw it online before you got in. What they did, it's not right. You didn't deserve that. Marcus studied the man's eyes in the mirror, the earnestness there. Thank you, he said simply. Downtown Los Angeles rose ahead, steel and glass reflecting the late afternoon sun. The hotel where his team had gathered waited with its vaulted ceilings and controlled air, a place that seemed too calm for the storm raging outside. Inside the suite, his counsel, Victor, was already pacing, tie loosened. Naomi, his lead investigator, had 3 laptops open, screens alive with feeds, timestamps, downloads of every video angle uploaded by passengers. You've seen the numbers, Naomi asked, swiveling one laptop toward him. 1.2 million views in under an hour. SkyGlobe's stock has dipped 6% already. They haven't even issued a statement, Victor added. The airline's PR team is scrambling. We've intercepted chatter they're considering calling this a miscommunication. Marcus unbuttoned his jacket, laid his case on the table, and sat. His fingers tapped lightly against the polished wood. Miscommunication, he repeated, the word flat, almost amused. That's what they'll call erasing someone. Naomi leaned forward. We can push harder. Layla Morgan, the young attendant you noticed near the divider, she's already reached out discreetly. She saw everything. She has her own recording. Marcus's head lifted. She's willing to testify. Naomi nodded. If it comes to that, she knows her career is on the line, but she said she couldn't stay silent. Silence filled the suite for a moment. Marcus let the weight of it settle. Allies were rare. When one stepped forward, you didn't waste them. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from Edward Bowman, CEO of SkyGlobe Airlines. Marcus, we need to talk. Please, tonight. Victor glanced at the screen. They're panicking. If you wanted leverage, this is it. Marcus exhaled slowly. This isn't just leverage. It's accountability. They thought they could humiliate me and walk away. But this time, the world is watching. The city lights began to flicker on outside, the horizon glowing like embers. Marcus stood, pacing now, energy coursing through him. His voice deepened, steady, deliberate. They will learn that dignity is not negotiable. Not for me, not for anyone. This isn't about a seat. It's about respect. It's about the people they erase every single day. Victor and Naomi exchanged a look, part admiration, part awe. They had seen Marcus in boardrooms, commanding, persuasive, but tonight there was something sharper in him, something unshakable. His phone buzzed once more. A headline alert. Black CEO removed from seat sparks. Calls for boycott. Marcus picked up his leather case, slid his boarding pass inside, and closed it gently. Get me a conference call with the board, he said. If they won't face me willingly, I'll make sure they face the truth. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Marcus Hale looked out the window, the glow of Los Angeles stretching far and restless. Somewhere beyond, in glass towers and hidden offices, SkyGlobe executives were already scrambling. And somewhere closer, his mother's voice echoed in his chest. Baby, when they push you aside, don't let them erase you. He smiled faintly, a curve of strength more than joy. They tried, he whispered, but this time they won't. The next morning dawned gray over Los Angeles, a thin marine layer stretching across the sky. From the windows of his suite, Marcus Hale could see the city, stirring cars flooding the freeways, delivery trucks unloading, pedestrians clutching coffee cups against the morning chill. He had not slept. His phone never stopped buzzing, but it wasn't the noise that kept him awake. It was the weight of choice. He could let the airline settle this quietly, take their apology, collect a token concession. It would be the path of least resistance, the path so many before him had been forced to take. Or he could push, knowing it meant battle against SkyGlobe's lawyers, their board, their shareholders, their lobbyists, against the very machine designed to silence people like him. Marcus buttoned his navy suit, the fabric crisp against his skin, and whispered to his reflection in the mirror, "This isn't just mine to carry. It's for everyone who sat down and was told to stand up." By mid-morning, Victor and Naomi joined him in the sedan headed for SkyGlobe's Manhattan headquarters. The building was a fortress of glass and steel, 38 floors tall, its mirrored panels reflecting the muted sky. As they approached, Marcus noticed a cluster of reporters stationed near the entrance, cameras and microphones at the ready. Security had set up barriers, but the murmurs grew louder the moment his car pulled in. "Mr. Hale, did they target you because of your race? Are you suing the airline? Do you still plan to invest?" Marcus stepped out calmly, straightened his tie, and gave them nothing but a steady, unreadable gaze. The silence was louder than any soundbite. He walked through the revolving doors with the precision of a man entering a battlefield. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble. 2 guards stiffened as he approached, one extending a hand as though to block his path. Marcus handed over a card without pausing. Marcus Hale, appointment with Edward Bowman. The guard's brows rose slightly, recognition flashing. For a moment, he hesitated, but then nodded and stepped aside. Marcus caught the faintest whisper behind him as employees passed. "That's him. The man from the video." The elevator carried them upward, numbers blinking steadily until the doors opened to the 38th floor. The boardroom waited, a cavern of glass walls overlooking the city, its long table lined with leather chairs. At the far end, Edward Bowman sat with shoulders slumped, silver hair gleaming under the recessed lights. Around him, the directors murmured quietly, papers shuffled, tension hung heavy. Stephen Grant, Vice President of Operations, stood near the windows. His posture was rigid, jaw tight, eyes sharp with contempt. When Marcus entered, Stephen's lips curled into a practiced smile. "Mr. Hale," he said smoothly. What an unexpected appearance. Marcus placed his leather case on the table with deliberate calm. "Unexpected, I believe my presence was requested." Bowman shifted uncomfortably. Yes, Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Marcus did not sit. His eyes swept the room, meeting each director's gaze until they looked away. "Before we begin, let me save us time. I am not here for pleasantries. I am here because your airline chose to humiliate me publicly, despite my confirmed ticket, despite everything I represent. And I have proof that this was no accident." Naomi slid a folder onto the table. Inside were transcripts, screenshots, statements. But Marcus didn't need the paper yet. He tapped his phone, and the speakers in the room filled with Isabella Cruz's voice, captured from a passenger's recording. "Sir, this seat has been reassigned." Then came Stephen's own voice. "From Layla Morgan's secret file, I don't care what his ticket says. That seat belongs to Vaughn. Make trouble if you have to." The boardroom froze. Bowman's face drained of color. Several directors shifted uneasily, whispering to one another. Stephen slammed a palm against the table. "This is doctored. You think we'll let you stage some performance to seize leverage?" Marcus turned slowly, eyes locking on him with calm precision. "Leverage? You think I need to stage humiliation to prove my worth? The only performance here was yours. The arrogance, the entitlement, the assumption that you could erase me, and you did it in front of 100 witnesses and the entire world." The room crackled with silence. Outside, the muted city stretched endlessly. But here, the air was suffocating. Marcus stepped closer to the table. I was prepared to deliver $100 to $20 million to keep this company alive. But money is not blind. It does not ignore truth. You want survival. Then you prove SkyGlobe deserves it. Otherwise, I let your empire collapse under the weight of its own rot. One director, Margaret Doyle, cleared her throat. Mr. Hale, what exactly do you want? Marcus's voice was low, steady, unflinching. First, the immediate removal of Stephen Grant. Second, the creation of an independent oversight committee with full authority to investigate discrimination complaints. Third, reforms to hiring, training, and passenger service policies. No cosmetic changes. Real, structural reform. Or else, my capital stays frozen, and so will the future of this airline. Bowman rubbed his forehead, sweat glistening. This is drastic. Marcus leaned forward. No, this is justice. And justice is never drastic. It is overdue, Stephen barked. You can't dictate terms without me. This company. Margaret cut him off, her voice sharp. Without you, Mr. Grant, this company may finally survive. The words struck like a hammer. Murmurs spread around the table. Some directors nodded subtly. Others avoided Stephen's glare. The tide was shifting. Marcus stepped back, lifted his case, and let his gaze sweep the room one final time. Decide quickly, because the world is watching, and so am I. He turned, the echo of his footsteps filling the silence, and left the boardroom. Behind him, voices clashed panic, denial, resignation. The door shut, leaving the storm inside. In the elevator descending, Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror, calm, steel-eyed, steady. He whispered softly, barely audible even to himself. They thought it was about a seat. They still don't understand. It's about everything. The moment Marcus Hale stepped out of SkyGlobe's headquarters, the chaos of the street hit him like a wave. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust in his direction, cameras clicking in rapid succession. Their questions blended into a single storm. Mr. Hale, are you calling for Stephen Grant's resignation? Do you plan to withdraw the $120 million is SkyGlobe guilty of systemic racism? Marcus paused just long enough to let the moment breathe. His voice was calm, steady, measured. The truth is already out there, and the truth will decide what happens next. He left it at that. No sound bites that could be twisted, no headline they could weaponize. Back in his hotel suite, he loosened his tie, sat at the edge of the bed, and finally allowed his chest to rise and fall in a long, heavy breath. Naomi and Victor entered minutes later, carrying laptops and folders. The story's everywhere, Naomi said, sliding her computer around so Marcus could see. News outlets across the spectrum were broadcasting the same clips Isabella Cruz ordering Marcus to vacate. Stephen Grant's recorded voice dismissing his ticket. Richard Vaughn sneering about who belonged in first class. The footage was running on a loop CNN, NBC, online platforms, late-night shows already preparing their monologues. Victor tapped another window. And look here, the hashtags. Justice for Marcus. SkyGlobe Truth. Respect in the skies. They've crossed 20 million mentions in under 24 hours. Marcus rubbed his forehead. The numbers were staggering, but what mattered was what they meant. People weren't just watching, they were angry, engaged, demanding answers. Stephen won't sit quietly, Naomi said. He'll spin this, paint you as opportunistic. We need to be ready. Almost on cue. The television flickered to a live broadcast. A conservative anchor, stern-faced, leaned into the camera. Tonight, questions arise about Marcus Hale's motives. Did the CEO of Phoenix Capital stage this confrontation to gain leverage in his deal with SkyGlobe? Is this truly about discrimination or about dollars? A panelist chimed in, waving papers. We've uncovered a failure in his early career, A small fund that collapsed in 2010. Doesn't that suggest instability? Maybe this is all part of a calculated scheme? Marcus let out a quiet laugh, not of amusement, but of recognition. "They're going to weaponize my scars," he murmured. Victor leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Do we counter now, or let them tire themselves out?" Marcus thought for a long moment. His mother's voice echoed in memory. "They will try to turn your strength into weakness. Don't fight with anger. Fight with truth." Finally, he looked up. "We counter, but not with denial, with honesty. The whole truth." That evening, Marcus sat in the glow of studio lights at CNN headquarters. The anchor's first question was blunt. "Mr. Hale, critics say you're exploiting your race and this incident to manipulate a business deal. They've even highlighted a failed fund from your past. How do you respond?" Marcus folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. His tone was even, but every word carried weight. "Yes, I failed in 2010. My first fund collapsed. I lost money. I doubted myself, but I rebuilt from nothing. And today, Phoenix Capital employs more than 200 people, many of them from communities like the one I came from. Failure didn't define me. It forged me. And what happened on that plane being forced from a seat I paid for, while a white passenger was treated as untouchable, that wasn't failure. That was discrimination. And it's something no one should endure. Not for money, not for status, not for anything." The studio went silent. The anchor's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. On social media, clips of Marcus's statement exploded, flooding timelines with comments. He owned his past. This is bigger than him. This is about all of us. Later that night, back in his hotel, Marcus scrolled through the messages pouring in. Some were from strangers, stories of being profiled in airports, denied upgrades, made to feel invisible. Others were from allies in business, colleagues, even competitors. One message caught his eye. It was from Layla Morgan, the young flight attendant. "I still have more recordings. Stephen ordered us to target you. I'm scared, but I can't stay silent anymore." Marcus clenched the phone, his jaw tightening. Another crack in the wall. Another piece of truth, ready to surface. Down the hall, Naomi and Victor debated strategies, lawsuits, press releases, timing. Marcus stepped to the window, looking out over the glowing grid of the city. His reflection stared back at him, tired but unyielding. "They want to bury me with lies," he whispered, "but the truth will be heavier." The third night after the flight, the city refused to sleep. Social media buzzed with new clips released by passengers, different camera angles of Marcus Hale being pressed by security, close-ups of Richard Vaughn's smug grin, even Isabella Cruz's voice as she insisted Marcus move. Each video was another nail in the coffin of SkyGlobe's public image. In the makeshift war room of his hotel suite, Marcus sat with Naomi and Victor, surrounded by glowing laptop screens and scattered printouts. Coffee cups piled on the table, evidence stacked in binders. The exhaustion in the room was palpable, but beneath it simmered something else: momentum. Naomi dropped a fresh file onto the desk. 7 former employees, all ready to testify. Every one of them faced harassment or discrimination under Stephen Grant. Most were silenced with non-disclosure agreements. Victor leaned in, adjusting his glasses. "We've also confirmed 3 passengers from your flight are willing to go public. They'll say they saw Grant give the order to push you out of your seat." Marcus rubbed his temple. He was tired, but the fire in his chest only burned hotter. "It's not just about me anymore. This is about exposing a pattern they've hidden for years." Naomi hesitated, then handed him her phone. On the screen was a message from Layla Morgan. Stephen knows I have recordings. He's threatening me. But I can't carry the guilt. I'll testify if you can protect me." Marcus stared at the words, his jaw tightening. "She's risking everything," he murmured, "and she's not alone." Across town, the SkyGlobe boardroom was a theater of panic. Margaret Doyle's voice cut through the tension. "The stock has dropped 15% in 3 days. We've lost nearly $500 million in value. Corporate clients are canceling contracts. This is unsustainable." Stephen sat rigid, his voice sharp with desperation. "Don't you see? This is all Hale's plot." He staged the humiliation to seize control of SkyGlobe. Margaret's cold eyes narrowed. "Do you have proof, Mr. Grant? Because all we have is evidence to the contrary." She held up a report Naomi's team had already leaked: past complaints, buried settlements, whistleblower accounts. The directors shifted uneasily. For the first time, Stephen's bluster sounded more like weakness than authority. Back at the hotel, Marcus leaned against the window, staring at the sprawl of the city lit up like a circuit board. His reflection looked older than he felt, but his eyes glowed with conviction. "They thought I'd bow my head. Instead, I'm forcing them to raise theirs." Naomi touched his shoulder gently. "Marcus, this is dangerous. The more we push, the more desperate Stephen will get." Marcus nodded, his voice low. "Desperation exposes truth. Let him thrash. Every move he makes digs his grave deeper." That night, NBC ran a primetime segment featuring Marcus live. The anchor's tone was direct. "Mr. Hale, SkyGlobe claims you're leveraging the scandal to pressure the company into concessions. How do you respond?" Marcus's answer was deliberate, calm. "If I wanted leverage, I would have stayed quiet, signed the deal, and collected profits. But I couldn't ignore what happened. Not for myself, and not for the countless passengers who've been treated the same way without a voice. This isn't a negotiation tactic. This is a wake-up call for an industry. Online." The reaction was electric. Stand with Marcus trended instantly. Comments flooded in ordinary travelers recounting slights, humiliations, small indignities that suddenly felt part of something larger. At SkyGlobe headquarters, Stephen watched the interview with a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. His face flushed crimson. "He's turning this around," he muttered. "He's painting me as the villain." His assistant tried to interject, but Stephen slammed the glass onto the desk, amber liquid spilling. "Find dirt on him. Dig into his family if you must. I won't lose to him." Meanwhile, Naomi burst into Marcus's suite with fresh intel. An anonymous email. Says they used to work under Stephen. They claim he took bribes from a supplier. They're willing to share documents. Marcus's lips curled into a thin smile. "The harder they try to bury me, the more they bury themselves." He stepped back to the window, the city glowing beneath him. His voice was quiet, steady. "This isn't about a seat anymore. This is about dismantling an empire built on arrogance and fear." Rain pattered against the glass of Marcus Hale's suite. The Los Angeles skyline blurred into streaks of gray. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Marcus sat at the dining table, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the papers spread before him. Naomi and Victor sat nearby, both hunched over laptops. They had been waiting for hours. And at last, the message came. A single vibration on Marcus's phone, a notification from a secure app. "I'm ready. Meet me." The sender, Layla Morgan. Naomi's brow furrowed as she read over Marcus's shoulder. She's risking her career, maybe even her safety. Marcus slid the phone back into his pocket. "And that's why we'll protect her. If she's willing to stand in the light, we make sure she doesn't stand alone." Later that evening, in the back corner of a quiet cafe, Layla appeared, She wore a hooded sweatshirt, her hair pulled low, and her eyes darted nervously around the room before she slid into the booth opposite Marcus. Her hand shook as she set down a small flash drive. "This," she whispered, "is everything. Recordings, emails, even directives from Stephen Grant. He told us to target passengers he labeled problematic. Sometimes it was about race, sometimes about money, but always it was about power." Victor leaned in. "You understand what handing us this means. They'll come after you." Layla's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "I know, but I watched what they did to you, Mr. Hale, and I thought, if they can do it to someone like you, what chance does anyone else have? I couldn't keep pretending." Marcus studied her face, the courage trembling beneath the fear. "Layla," he said softly, "you've already done more than most would dare. I promise you this won't be in vain." They left the cafe separately, precautions in place. But as Marcus rode back in the car, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His instincts, honed through years of negotiating deals and reading adversaries, whispered that the stakes had just escalated. Hours later, Naomi confirmed what they feared. The files were real. Direct orders from Stephen Grant, instructing staff to override boarding passes, fabricate reassignment justifications, and prioritize elite passengers like Richard Vaughn. It was systemic, deliberate, damning. "This is the crack in the armor," Naomi said, her voice tight with urgency. "With this, we don't just have a case, we have the case." Marcus exhaled, the weight of possibility pressing against his chest. Yet inside, doubt flickered. Would the public believe? Would the board take action or bury it deeper? That night, he dreamed of his father, the old man's hands, rough with years of factory work, gripping his shoulder as he whispered, "Don't let them turn your silence into their shield." The next morning, Marcus appeared on Good Morning America, across from the host. His posture was steady, his gaze unwavering. He didn't reveal the files yet, but his words carried the weight of what he now held. "This isn't just about me," Marcus told millions watching. "This is about an airline that believes some passengers deserve dignity, and others deserve humiliation. That belief isn't just wrong, it's dangerous, and it must end." The interview spread like wildfire. Hashtags multiplied. Fly fair. SkyGlobe exposed. Passengers across the country began sharing their own stories. Mothers traveling with children denied boarding. Elderly passengers forced to give up seats. Immigrants singled out for random checks. Each testimony was another stone in the avalanche. At SkyGlobe headquarters, Stephen Grant raged. He tore a printout of the interview in half, his voice booming against the boardroom walls. "He's poisoning everything. Do you fools not see what's happening?" Margaret Doyle sat opposite, arms crossed. "What I see, Stephen, is a man exposing what you've spent years hiding. And what I see is a company on the brink of collapse because of you." Edward Bowman remained silent at the head of the table, sweat gathering at his temples. He looked tired, diminished, his authority bleeding away with each headline. For Marcus, the pressure was relentless. Support poured in, but so did threats. Anonymous emails warned him to drop it before it's too late. Security trailed his steps, and still, he pressed forward. That evening, Naomi placed the flash drive on the table between them. "The choice is yours," she said. "Release it, and SkyGlobe burns. Hold it, and maybe you negotiate reforms, but either way, there's no going back." Marcus stared at the tiny piece of metal, so small in his palm yet heavy with consequence. He closed his hand around it, feeling the edges press into his skin. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. Sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it demands to be heard. The boardroom was filled to capacity. Directors lined both sides of the polished mahogany table, their faces etched with fatigue and worry. The windows looked out over Manhattan, but the skyline was only a backdrop to the storm brewing inside. Edward Bowman sat at the head, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of the company itself pressed on him. Stephen Grant stood near the far end, papers in hand, his voice sharp, desperate. Marcus Hale is orchestrating this entire fiasco. Stephen declared, he's not here for justice. He's here to stage a takeover, to bleed this company for his own gain. Margaret Doyle leaned forward, her tone cutting. And yet it was your voice in those recordings. Stephen, your orders, your signature, you can't spin this away. Murmurs rippled across the table. Some directors avoided eye contact. Others stared at Stephen with thinly veiled contempt. The doors opened. Marcus entered, calm as ever, Naomi and Victor trailing behind. He placed his leather case on the table and let silence settle before speaking. I didn't come here to debate rumors, Marcus said, his voice even. I came here with proof. Naomi slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed transcripts, verified by independent experts, Stephen's directives, Isabella Cruz's compliance reports, passenger complaints that had been buried, and then the flash drive Layla Morgan's recordings. Edward's face paled. The board members leaned in, eyes widening as Stephen's voice filled the speakers. If Hale shows up, move him. Vaughn gets the seat. I don't care what the manifest says. Gasps filled the room. Margaret's jaw tightened. How do you explain this? Stephen's face flushed crimson. Fabricated Hale and his people spliced this together to destroy me. Marcus's gaze sharpened. You think the world will believe that the recordings, the testimonies, the passengers, they've already seen it. You can't bury the truth with louder lies. The tension cracked when Margaret turned to Edward. Mr. Bowman, this is untenable. The public is demanding accountability. Shareholders are threatening lawsuits. This company cannot survive with Grant in leadership. Edward swallowed hard, his voice weak. Stephen, I think it's time you step aside. Stephen slammed a fist against the table. You coward! You think Hale cares about this airline? He's freezing the budget to choke us. You'll hand him everything, Marcus rose, his presence commanding the room. You still don't understand. I don't need to own SkyGlobe to change it. What I need is for you to answer to the people you serve, to the passengers you humiliate, to the employees you silence. If that terrifies you, then maybe you were never fit to lead. The room fell silent. Stephen's chest heaved, rage burning in his eyes, but the tide had turned. Several directors were nodding now, quietly, firmly. Margaret spoke again, her voice resolute. I move that Stephen Grant be suspended, effective immediately, pending full investigation. I second the motion, another director said quickly. Hands went up, one after another, until only Edward hesitated. Finally, with a deep sigh, he raised his own. Stephen stared in disbelief. You fools! You'll regret this. Two security officers entered quietly. Standing at his shoulders, Stephen's protests echoed down the hall as he was escorted out, his words dissolving into meaningless noise. When the doors shut again, the silence that followed was thick with both relief and dread. Edward turned to Marcus, his expression worn, almost pleading. What happens now? He asked. Marcus stood tall, his voice steady as stone. Now, you rebuild with integrity, with oversight, with the reforms I outlined, or you lose not just my investment, but the trust of every passenger who ever sets foot on your planes. Naomi's eyes flicked around the room, reading the faces. For the first time, she saw not just fear, but agreement. The tide wasn't just turning, it had already turned. Margaret leaned back, folding her arms. Mr. Hale, you've made your point. Perhaps it's time we talk about partnership, not just investment. Marcus paused. Considering her words, he could feel the weight of choice pressing again, how far to push, how much to demand, how quickly to move. But for now, he said only, partnership starts with trust. Prove you can earn it. The meeting adjourned with quiet murmurs, directors shuffling out, the storm still lingering but the air shifting. Marcus lingered at the window, looking down at the streets below. The city pulsed with life, restless and relentless. Behind him, Victor whispered, "You just toppled him." Marcus shook his head slowly. No, he toppled himself. I just held up the mirror. The city was alive with noise, but inside Marcus Hale's hotel suite, there was only stillness. The storm in the boardroom had ended with Stephen Grant's removal, yet Marcus knew this was not victory. It was only the beginning. Naomi leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Marcus pace slowly across the room. "You've forced their hand," she said. "The board has no choice but to reform now." Marcus shook his head. Boards don't change because of conscience. They change because they're cornered. Stephen's gone, but the culture that made him powerful is still there. If we stop now, nothing truly changes. Victor, seated with a stack of documents, looked up. Then, "What's the next step? We've frozen the $120 million. You've exposed the rot, and Stephen's out. What more can you push?" Marcus stopped at the window, looking out at the endless stream of headlights below. His reflection stared back, eyes dark but steady. "We make sure this can't happen again, not to me, not to anyone. Policies, oversight, accountability. If they won't do it willingly, we'll force them." The following day, the headlines screamed of SkyGlobe's crisis. VP ousted amid scandal. Marcus Hale forces airline shakeup. Shares rebounded slightly, but questions lingered. Analysts speculated whether Hale would withdraw his investment completely or double down to seize influence. In the quiet of a newsroom, Layla Morgan prepared to step into the light. The young flight attendant sat nervously in front of a camera, her hands clasped tightly together. When the interview began, her voice trembled but grew steadier with each word. "I was there," she said. "I saw what happened, and I know it wasn't an accident. Stephen Grant ordered us to reassign Mr. Hale's seat. It wasn't the first time something like this happened. We were told to treat certain passengers as more important, others as disposable." The footage went viral within minutes. People didn't just see Marcus anymore. They saw Layla, young, vulnerable, risking everything for the truth. Her courage gave the story new power. Marcus watched the interview alone in his suite. When it ended, he closed his eyes for a long moment. Pride filled him, but so did worry. Layla had just painted a target on her back. That evening, he called her. "Layla, I saw your interview. You spoke with strength." Her laugh was nervous. "Strength." My knees were shaking the whole time. "Strength isn't about not shaking," Marcus said softly. "It's about standing anyway." There was a silence, then her voice steadied. "They can't erase me now, not when the world is watching." Meanwhile, Edward Bowman faced the board once more. The directors, emboldened by Marcus's stance and Layla's testimony, demanded swift reforms. Margaret Doyle's voice was sharp as steel. "We can no longer survive on apologies and settlements. We need a systemic overhaul, and we need Hale's partnership to do it." Edward rubbed his temples, exhausted. "He'll demand more than we can give," Margaret countered. "No, he'll demand exactly what's necessary." Days blurred into a storm of meetings, interviews, and negotiations. Marcus moved with precision, never raising his voice but never yielding ground. He outlined reforms point by point, mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight committees, transparent reporting of passenger complaints, compensation structures tied to equity goals. At first, resistance simmered. Some executives scoffed at the costs. Others feared backlash. But the pressure from the public, investors, and media left no alternative. Each day, the airline hesitated. The outrage grew louder. Finally, late one night, Marcus stood again in the SkyGlobe boardroom. The air was heavy, but not with hostility this time. It was expectation. Edward spoke first, voice cautious. "Mr. Hale, we've reviewed your proposals. They're sweeping. They will change the very fabric of how we operate." Marcus met his gaze evenly. That's the point. Incremental change is camouflage. What's needed here is transformation. Margaret added, "The board is prepared to vote. But before we do, we want to hear your vision, what you believe this airline can become." Marcus paused, scanning the faces around the table. For a moment, he thought of his father again, of his mother's steady wisdom, of every slight and humiliation he had endured in silence. And then he spoke. An airline isn't just about flying planes. It's about carrying lives. Every passenger who steps on board brings their story, their dignity, their worth. When you strip that away, you don't just lose a customer, you lose your soul. SkyGlobe can be more than profitable. It can be just. It can set a standard the entire industry follows, but only if you're brave enough to see dignity not as a cost, but as the very foundation of your business. Silence followed, deep and unbroken. Then, one by one, directors nodded. Edward sighed, his voice quiet. "Then let's vote." When the hands rose, nearly unanimous, Marcus knew a line had been crossed. SkyGlobe had bent, at last, to something greater than fear. Later, back in his hotel, Marcus stood by the window again. Naomi and Victor lingered nearby, their exhaustion tempered by relief. Victor broke the silence. "You've done it. You've changed them." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I didn't change them. Truth did. I just refused to look away." And as the city lights stretched endlessly below, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. For the first time since the flight, he let his shoulders ease, if only slightly. The story of Marcus Hale teaches us something timeless. Dignity cannot be negotiated. No matter how wealthy, accomplished, or ordinary someone may be, the right to respect is universal. Too often in life, injustice disguises itself as procedure, or policy, or an unfortunate mistake. But beneath those words, real people are diminished, their worth questioned. For older generations who have witnessed decades of social change, Marcus's stand is a reminder that progress is fragile unless we guard it. We may not all sit in boardrooms or command millions of dollars, but every one of us faces moments when we must decide, will we stay silent, or will we speak? The lesson is clear: silence protects the oppressor, not the oppressed. By standing firm, Marcus turned humiliation into a catalyst for reform, and so can we. In our workplaces, in our communities, in our daily lives, we can choose to uphold dignity for ourselves and others. The real power is not in money or titles, it is in refusing to accept less than respect. That is a lesson worth carrying, at any age. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be with us for the next story. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.